Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the School Safety Community Meeting. My name is Scott Nanick. I'm the superintendent here at Bret Harte Union High School District, and I'm proud to provide the location for this important meeting. For over 20 years, the Calaveras County Office of Education, the Bret Harte, Calaveras, Mark Twain, and Vallecito school districts has a long-standing history of working together with emergency responders, including the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department, the Angels Camp Police Department, and our local fire departments, with a focus on student safety. This meeting came out of social media incidents at the beginning of the school year that involved threats made to schools. Thankfully, the event was determined to be a hoax, but some of the details that event came out of prompted us to feel a community event would be appropriate. It was discovered that many of our students had seen the threat on social media, but hardly any of them reported it to an adult or law enforcement. And even worse, they exaggerated the situation by sending it on to their friends. School safety is important to all of us, and every school district safety plan is tailored to each district's individual needs and will vary based on those needs. For tonight, questions were submitted ahead of tonight's gathering. As you hear from the agencies, remember that every incident or potential incident has a unique response. The panel will share more generic approaches to incidents. Questions that were too specific to address tonight are being referred to the agency or district. At the end of the presentation, you'll be provided a way to provide feedback about this meeting or make contact with your local school district. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce our panel from the Calaveras County Office of Education, Jared Hungerford.
Hello, thank you for being here tonight.
The Calaveras County Sheriff's Department, Sheriff.
Good evening. I'm Sheriff Rochelle Whiting.
Angels Camp Police Department, Chief.
Good evening, Angels Camp Police Chief Scott Ellis.
And representing Calaveras County Fire Districts.
Richard Dickinson, Fire Chief, Calaveras Consolidated Fire.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn this event over to them.
Can I kick it off?
Yes.
All right. So first off, I'm just going to go through some of the topics for what happens when a threat is received, and then what our local law enforcement response looks like to active incidents on campus. So, but before I get into that, I want to talk about pre-event planning. As Mr. Nanick mentioned, at the beginning of the school year, we had those text messages that were spread around to a bunch of the different school districts, and there was nothing specific about our local campuses, but we were involved with that. It was determined to be a cyber-based hoax. It was not targeted at any specific school or person, but it raised a lot of questions in our community. It raised a lot of concerns and fears in a lot of our students and our parents. And so the questions were about, like, how does the school react when a threat like that comes in? What happens when law enforcement is notified? What types of investigations are done? What happens to the students when they're involved in those type of threats? So the school administrators, police officers, our deputy sheriffs, we listened to those questions coming up, and that's at the point right at the beginning of this school year we started having that discussion. We saw the need. We thought that we would do this information sharing. So although today is not a Q&A type style meeting, it's more of an information sharing, and this is being recorded so we can use this later to inform our community members and our parents of everything that we're going to talk about today. So our local schools and law enforcement have had a long-standing, good working relationship. Both the Angels Camp Police Department and the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office, we allocate resources. We have dedicated school resource officers. Both of them are here today. The lights are too bright, so I can't see where they're sitting. But the Angels Camp Police Officer Scott Kirkman and our Calaveras County Sheriff's Office School Resource Officer Scott McNerlin are both here today. Those SROs serve as a consistent, direct conduit for the school administrators to work closely with law enforcement on school safety and when juvenile crimes on campus occur with the juveniles. It's those daily interactions with the SROs that is extremely important, but it's also equally important that we share our plans and our policies with each other. We get a better understanding of each other's capabilities and our procedures ahead of time. We try and remain transparent and accountable to each other. You know, we really try and explain amongst law enforcement in the schools, you know, why we're doing things the way we're doing it. Because there are definitely limitations to what the schools can do, and there are limitations to what law enforcement can do, you know, with interviewing juveniles. So we know this ahead of time. We work on that relationship building, and we try and empower our deputies and our school leaders to work together to co-create strategies on what we can accomplish and what we can do better. So outside of responding to incidents, we also work with the schools on public safety educational components. We just completed several Red Ribbon Week presentations from our narcotics investigators who spoke to students about the dangers of drugs. The Sheriff's Office has been hosting the last couple years ALICE trainings in our county. We have another one coming up on January 2nd and 3rd. If anyone's interested, the flyer is on the Sheriff's Office Facebook page. Hopefully everyone is familiar with ALICE. ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, Evacuate. It's a school safety training program that teaches how to respond to active shooter or aggressive intruders. And the training is done not only with our teachers and our school administrators, but there is also age-appropriate activities and learning components that is shared with all of our students in the county as well. So with all that pre-event planning and relationship building with the schools and law enforcement, I'd like to move on and just talk about what we do when a threat is actually received. So first we evaluate whether this threat is a self-harm threat or a threat against other people. The county has an interagency leadership team that the Sheriff's Office is involved with, and it's numerous other county departments and other governmental organizations. And there was a project from that team that was spearheaded by the Behavioral Health Department where they created a flow chart for the schools. I don't know if you were going to go over that.
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Have it too.
I'm stealing some of Jared's thunder
It's
here.
okay. It's all right.
So if you've ever gone on the Calaveras County Office of Education's website, under programs, under student mental health, there's a flow chart, and the schools use this. One is if there's a threat for self-harm, and one is if there's a threat against others. And then, I mean, it even goes through the summary report, and the full threat assessment response protocol is all up on the district's Office of Education's website. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It goes through exactly what behavioral health put out and in working with the schools on what happens. So if the Sheriff's Office is called for a self-harm threat, then deputies conduct an evaluation per 5150 of the Welfare Institution Codes. We determine if the student is a danger to themselves or others, and if their level of crisis dictates for an involuntary evaluation or not. Sometimes we work with mental health services, the school, the parents, come up with a safety plan in lieu of hospitalization. Sometimes law enforcement does have to transport juveniles to the hospital and turn them over to behavioral health services. So for the next step in the process. So that's how a self-harm threat is handled that where law enforcement might be involved. On the flip side of that, what if law enforcement gets called to a threat towards other people on campus? And this is the most concerning, and this is where we get the most questions from parents. So there's usually a lot of data collection points. There's a lot of information gathering that must quickly take place with the threat, the urgency, and the uncertainty that comes with these type of calls. The information that law enforcement is assessing, it includes whether there's an immediate threat or a delayed threat. An example of a delayed threat is we might see a social media sharing where it says tomorrow or Tuesday something is going to happen on campus, where maybe campus isn't currently in session. So that might be a delayed threat where we have a little time to come up with plans, and we work with the schools on how we're going to handle the next day that school's in session. And then we also evaluate the credibility of the threat. You know, is it a generic, you will regret this, or you will regret what's going to happen at school tomorrow? Or sometimes we see the generic threats of there will be a shooting incident on your campus, but it doesn't exactly say which campus or who's involved, or we don't know where it comes from. And then we have to start tracking down if that even stemmed from anywhere locally or not. So part of the initial information gathering includes whether or not there was one specific person threatening another specific person or a group. There's a lot that goes into the analysis of the initial report. Sometimes this is started when the very first call is received into dispatch and we start tracking down the information. And then sometimes it's harder where law enforcement has to get on scene, and much like we see at the high schools, you're dealing with teenagers talking to teenagers and kind of tracking down the root source analysis of where some of these things come from. And this can be extremely hard when multiple people start posting and sharing the threats on social media. So we can't stress enough, please just report it. Don't post it. Don't try and be the first person or be involved, because then you're just purporting the issue and sharing it. So please just report it to law enforcement. If you've noticed, our office, as well as the Angels Camp Police Department, we take school safety and threats very serious. Even the cyber-based mass notification threats that are sent out, even when we determine that they're hoaxes, we know it's not real, we still put deputies and extra patrol on the campus. We still have our volunteers go by the campuses just to ease the fears and to let the parents and the students feel our presence there. And that's even a fine line that we have to walk, because although we have shared concern for the safety of our children in this county, let's face it, some parents really want to see us on campus, and there's some parents that just believe they don't want to see law enforcement at all in the location of where their children are being educated. So those are all factors as well that we're dealing with on a daily basis. So a call comes in, let's say a threat, and we start determining the criticality of it. Sometimes we have enough information to assess if one deputy is able to go handle it. Sometimes there's too many unknowns, and we'd rather send more resources than we initially think we need, because we can always peel them back. The sheriff's office has threat liaison officers who are certified through the Regional Fusion Center. There's a whole state threat assessment system where our trained deputies work closely with public safety, homeland security, community, and with the FBI. A primary function of our threat liaison officers are to help our deputies identify threats and/or terrorism-related situations, and then share that information. So any threat that comes in involving a school, we file a SAR report, a suspicious activity report, through the Central California Intelligence Center. By doing this, we are engaging our state and federal partners in the threat assessments. Sometimes they're able to quickly come back to us and let us know, yes, this is widespread, this has already been determined to be a hoax, so we don't dedicate too many resources to it. And sometimes they're immediately able to tell us this was generated overseas and this has nothing to do with your area. And then sometimes when we start that threat, we engage the FBI, so they start assisting us with obtaining background information for assessing what's going on. As that's happening, we start working with the school officials to gather information. Most of the time, the school's already commenced starting interviewing the students. We're trying to figure out who's involved, what the motives are, what's the intent, what the means are. Part of our investigation entails if the parents or guardians in the same home, do they have registered firearms? Talking to the parents or talking to the students, whether the kids have access to the firearms, or ensuring that they have no access to firearms. And then part of our investigation sometimes also entails if there's any intoxication involved, meaning are the students involved under the influence of any alcohol or drugs that's maybe altering and impacting their state of mind, and they might be saying things because of that. That all comes into play in the investigation. Part of our investigation includes if the parents have been notified. So while all this stuff is happening, at some point we start linking up with the schools and we start crafting our messages for the parents if the situation calls for it, and pushing that information out on what's happening. So the reason I'm giving such a lengthy discussion is because I know oftentimes when things at the schools go on, the most critical complaints we get is because of our delay in notifying the parents. And I just want to give a full explanation of sometimes we're trying to gather and sort stuff out, and we don't want to put false information out early. But we do understand your concerns, and we do know that our communication strategy does need to be better, and it does need to be a priority. So with all that, we figure out if any actual crimes have been committed. And a lot of people ask us, well, why can't you arrest the juvenile for making a threat? So the California Penal Code describes that a threat is considered criminal if it is made with the intent to cause great bodily injury or death, it is communicated verbally or in writing or electronically, and it is clear, immediate, unconditional, and specific enough to cause the victim to be in sustained fear for their safety or the safety of their immediate family. All of those elements must be met in order for us to be able to charge someone with violation of 422 of the Penal Code for criminal threats. So if it's determined that a student made general kind of non-specific veiled statements that are extremely concerning but might not rise to the level of criminal threats, then our staff will work with the school officials, will determine the best course of action. Sometimes that may lead to suspension or expulsion of the students. It's up to the school, but we work with them, and that's what our school resource officers are there for, to be the subject matter experts on actual crimes. If we determine that a crime has been committed, sometime we will issue a citation to the juvenile and release them back to their parents or guardians, and this starts the process of the case in the juvenile justice system. Sometimes we work with the probation department and we will actually arrest juveniles. Once they're taken into custody, they can be transported by probation to a juvenile detention facility. Consideration as to whether a juvenile is actually arrested depends on the severity of the crime, the probability or likelihood that it's going to continue, the type of support the juvenile may have at home. It's based on a totality of every individual circumstance that comes into play, because we do take it very seriously depending on what the crimes were compared to taking juveniles out of their homes. And then lastly, I'd like to transition and just talk briefly about law enforcement's actual response to active shooter incidents on campus. We do have a rapid response and deployment policy. There is no delay. The first deputy on scene does not wait. If there is a reasonable belief that acts or threats by a suspect are placing lives in imminent danger, then our deputies consider all reasonable options to reduce, prevent, or eliminate the threat. Deputies decide often under a multiple of difficult and rapidly evolving circumstances what actions need to be taken, but they will not delay. They will immediately go onto campus. It's during these times when it is so important, and it's when we are rapidly trying to assess what's happening on campus, why we really urge parents not to come onto campus and to give us a little patience. There's a chance of misidentification and deputies who don't know if parents coming on campus are a suspect and part of the problem, if they're a witness, if they're a victim. And so those deputies have to quickly triage who's a threat and who's a not. And then also when parents start trying to come on campus, it can sometimes cause our law enforcement resources to have to be redirected and diverted to dealing with that situation instead of what we were actually coming on campus. So it's not only out of safety concerns, but it also causes major delays in resolving the actual incidents themselves because we have to pull resources to deal with it. So as the first deputies rapidly respond directly to an active shooter threat, we form what's called rescue task forces with our fire department partners. The protocol it used to be that law enforcement would go into, somewhere where there's an active shooter, and we would pull victims out to where a medical triage area was set up. And with these rescue task forces now, we actually escort fire and ambulance personnel into the warm zones for getting life-saving measures more quickly to downed victims. So our Calaveras Consolidated Fire Chief, Rich Dickinson here, he's a representative of our fire departments and the partnership that we have for this process. Chief, do you want to briefly describe the fire department's role in the rescue task force, maybe some of the personal protective equipment that you guys are getting the firefighters, and tell them a little bit about the trainings that we're doing?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to cover just three things: where we were, where we are, and where we're going. And I'm going to talk about the group, meaning fire, law, and EMS, which would be the ambulance, and air transports would be the helicopters. So where we were, as the sheriff said, we would always stage. If there was a knife threat, if there was a fight, and I'm going to just talk about the schools, a gun, we would stage a couple blocks away, and we would wait till we got clearance from the law enforcement that it was okay to come in. I'm going to basically talk about the 90s with that. Columbine. Columbine was a school. We didn't really know active shooter that well, but the school, young person with a gun took a lot of lives. That changed America. That changed law enforcement and fire to rethink how we were doing business. Because my role for the fire service part and for the first responders, it's called the golden hour. And the golden hour is from the time of the call to get the patient to the hospital. You have basically about 1 hour on a life-threatening incident to be able to mitigate and take care of that patient so they can survive. Where we are now, we have the training with the active shooter, and it's a relationship. It's a relationship with law, fire, and EMS, and we've changed the way we do business. For my side, it's called force protection. We have a law enforcement officer in the front, in the back, and we're not waiting. As soon as we get the green light that it is a knife, it is a gun, we're going to put ourselves in a position to get in there and get those kids out and get them immediate care, get them to a hospital to give them a chance to survive. What we wear is with law. I'm looking at both of them. They wear, vests, ballistic vests. When the law enforcement goes in, they have helmets. We now have done that too. The only thing we don't do on the first responder side, fire EMS, is we don't carry a gun. We're not that good to do that. So we built this relationship, and we train. We do annual training, and I'm going to say we're on the cutting edge. There's a lot of places in America that don't. We're not reactive, we're proactive. And again, that relationship with law and fire and EMS here in Calaveras County, I'm very, very proud to sit in front of you and say, we're good at what we do. And we don't take it for granted where we're going to go. We're going to continue to train. We're going to continue to make sure that we're looking for cutting edge ways to do better for the community. And I'm going to be honest, I got 5 grandkids that live in Calaveras County. My daughter's a school teacher here in Calaveras County, and most of our firefighters that live here have kids in school. We care, and we appreciate law letting us help out immediately to get in there. Have I had that? No. Do I know how it's going to go? No, but muscle memory, practicing again and again and again, and building that relationship with the law enforcement to be able to trust each other, trust that we know what we're doing on our side, and trust that they know what they're doing on their side. With that said, I don't know what type of incident we would go to the school until we get there. It could be 1 or 2 victims, or it could be 10 to 15 to 20, and then that becomes a mass casualty incident. I want to reassure all of you out there that we're good at what we're doing, and the only way we can be good is we train, and annually we pick different places in the county to do a mass casualty drill with active shooter. I covered that good enough?
Yes, Chief, thank you very much. So I know I covered a lot of things talking about the threats, but Chief Ellis, do you want to talk about all other law enforcement in the county and the integration that happens with active incidents?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on the rescue task force training that we do, it's not just Calaveras Sheriff's Office, Angels Camp Police Department, and Consolidated Fire. It's CAL FIRE, it's the Forest Service, it's California Highway Patrol. It's all active law enforcement agencies within the county. Another piece of that is communication. At least for Angels Camp PD and Calaveras County Sheriff's, is we share the same dispatch center. So all the calls that enter dispatch, we have communication with one another when any type of incident happens. So if something happens at Bret Harte High School, it's not going from one communication center or one department to another department before the information gets sent out. It's shared immediately to all involved parties, so all agencies can immediately start responding to any kind of critical incident. I think, one of the unique things about this county is the inner workings and the collaboration that we have with one another to work closely together and understand the needs that we have of each other, and to train together so that when something happens, we have a pre-planned operationally, we've already pre-planned for something like that, so we know what's going to occur. We know how we should be responding. Obviously, critical incidents are evolving, they change. We never know what we're going to be walking into, but we're going to be able to adapt a lot more quickly because we've already got the organization in place and the planning on how to handle those events. So, I give kudos to both our fire and sheriff's department, all the law enforcement, for us being able to work together in such a large group with different entities to make this work. I worked in an agency outside of the county for about 16 years and down in the valley, and those agencies pretty much work independently. There's not a lot of interagency collaboration for significant events. Not that they don't train for those events, but they just don't train together. Communication is always going to be an issue, and every critical incident that you'll hear about nationwide, communication always ends up being an issue. The nice thing about Calaveras County is I think all the law enforcement agencies in this county do have the capability to communicate via the Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center. I'll give you just a quick example. Last night we had an incident here in Angels Camp. CHP was monitoring the channel, heard what had happened, and ended up stopping a vehicle that they thought might have been involved in that incident. Had they not have access to or been listening and paying attention to what's going on in the county, they wouldn't have known and maybe wouldn't have made that stop or we would have lacked that opportunity to potentially catch somebody that may have been involved in something criminally. But because we're all looking out for one another and they want to make sure they're hearing anything that's going on in the county so they can assist, we're all able to do that for one another. I know CAL FIRE law enforcement uses our dispatch center regularly. I think Forest Service might as well, probation, all the like I said, every single law enforcement agency I think in the county has a pretty good ability to communicate. Now there's going to be a problem always when you've got 50 or 60 people trying to get on the one radio channel that we have. That's an issue we'll have to deal with at that time. But I think the communication that we have in this county is really good, and the inner workings and ability to work together smoothly is very beneficial to everybody in the safety of the community, the public, and the schools.
Yeah, I think those radio interoperability and license sharing agreements that we put in place in this county are highly beneficial. He mentioned the probation department. They are a huge force multiplier for us. A lot of our probation officers in this county are armed and we train with them. We have, through the AB 109 program, through the Community Corrections Partnership, we have 2 deputies assigned over there that are integrated in with probation. So sometimes on the school events, you will see probation officers, whether they actively go onto campus and are assisting us, or whether we use them more as security and traffic control and issues like that. But they're a huge multiplier and a huge help. One last thing before I send this back over to Jared in the Office of Education is just to talk about, once a threat is neutralized, law enforcement starts the transition process from response to crime scene processing. And that's where we really need people's patience. You know, we will work on escorting students and teachers and anyone that's on campus and escorting them off. The school will commence their parent reunification process. They'll start messaging and how we're dealing with accountability and reuniting people. But the crime scene processing is a very lengthy process that takes time that we will not rush, because if there is a chance we do have a suspect in custody, we want to ensure prosecution. That means that sometimes backpacks, purses, car keys, a whole parking lot, student lot full of vehicles, all those things may have to stay in place for hours or most likely days. And we understand it's frustrating. We will get to it. We'll have a process for releasing all that information, but it takes patience. And if anything like that, God forbid, does happen, it just takes understanding the magnitude of what happened compared to some minor inconveniences. So that is the major portion of all the topics I had to cover for law enforcement, but I know Jared has a lot of stuff for Office of Education.
Thank you very much. So I moved to Calaveras County about 10 years ago, so I had some experience down in the valley as well. And I moved here to raise my children here with my wife. And I have to say that in terms of feeling safe and feeling that my children are safe at school, I feel confident as a parent. And I'm just really thankful for the 3 here on the stage and for the agencies they represent, and those that aren't here for all of their hard work and the planning and their dedication. And I've seen it as a school administrator as well. My first assignment here in Calaveras County was as principal of Avery Middle School, and law enforcement was involved and fire was involved in our safety team meetings on that campus. And the fire drill regularity, I'm telling you, in the Modesto area, we maybe had 1 fire drill a year. We had them monthly, and evacuation drills monthly with the fire department watching and giving feedback. So the coordination, the communication has been really strong. I can attest to that, and to the presence of law enforcement whenever there's been one of these general threats. We've seen the increased presence and are thankful for it. So thank you. I just want to publicly acknowledge that I, and I'm sure the rest of our community here, are very thankful for your service. Our first priority in the schools is the safety of our students. We know that when parents send their children to us at school, they're giving us a huge responsibility and an honor. And so the school as well plans for emergencies, and we will address the needs of the student safety first. So when it does come to communication, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we do ask for patience in communication. We do not want to communicate bad information or something that may make the situation worse or create panic. So we will first deal with the emergency at hand to ensure all students are safe, to communicate with law enforcement and fire. And then as soon as we are able and we have information that we can pass on that is useful, we will do so. And every school district has a different way of communicating. Some have systems that they have bought into, like SMORE. Some use constant contact, kind of direct messaging services. And so whatever it is, every district has a way of quickly getting in contact. We do ask that if you are privy to any kind of threat or gossip of a threat, that you would report it to the school and to law enforcement. Don't just pass it on to people that you know in the community, other parents. Please do let us know as well, so that that can be on our radar and we can take all proper precautions to ensure that school is safe. So I wanted to explain the difference between a few different terms, because we do prepare for a variety of different situations. So we have fire drills, evacuations, and lockdown drills. And those drills include tracking students to ensure that we have everybody in the building if it's a fire, and that we are reviewing all of our emergency equipment. We have safety equipment inside each classroom in the event of injuries and emergencies. And when we have lockdown drills, we are typically practicing for the highest level of lockdown, which would be that there is an immediate threat of violence on campus. For that, we lock doors, we close windows, we turn off lights, we have students get out of the view of any of those, moved into a different room if possible, but trying to make it appear as if no one is in the room, and there can be no data gathered on who is in a room by being outside of it. At the same time, we also have a secure hold and shelter in place. So in a secure hold environment, instruction can continue, but we don't allow students to leave the classroom or wander about. And that may be in a situation where there is potential activity in the area that's unsafe. True story, at Hazel Fisher not too long ago, a few years ago, there was a mountain lion very near the campus that was moving towards the campus. And so they had to ensure that nobody was leaving campus leaving their classroom, but they could continue instruction. The mountain lion was not going to cause any trouble as long as students didn't go out and meet the mountain lion. Or if there is police activity that is off campus but nearby, but is not related to, there's no related threat to the school, then likewise, that may happen. And when I worked in Modesto, we were in that situation for quite a while as a perpetrator with a weapon ran straight through campus. Not a direct threat to the school, but he had a weapon and was in the area, and so students had to be locked in locked rooms. And then the shelter in place is when there's a response to a threat that's outside of the building, but perhaps not an immediate threat, but we still want to close windows and ensure that there isn't any visuals in the room. Every school does an emergency preparedness plan, as well as a school safety plan. The school safety plans have public and private portions to them. The private portions are because we don't want anyone who would plan violence against our students to know exactly what our procedure would be and where students might go in a situation like that. But just know that those plans are in place. In a situation where if there were to be an active shooter on campus, every situation is going to be different in how we direct students. Lockdown isn't always the answer, right? If there is a threat in the immediate area, and so we're going to have to make that decision in the moment. That's part of that Alice training. Also, is to understand that the run, hide, and fight kind of priority or hide, run, fight, order of priority of actions depending on the situation and where the threat is. Now, we wanted to let you know that as a school system, we do have a lot of mental health resources available, both for meeting the needs of students that we may do a risk assessment on, but also in the case that there is an incident. And we've had incidents on campuses, we've had tragedies in our schools where we've had to respond with all of the resources at our disposal. We partner with Calaveras Behavior Health. We bring in our school counselors, our school psychologists, our wellness center staff, school mental health clinicians. It's kind of an all hands on deck kind of situation. And we're there to be, any further tragedies or a violent event on campus, God forbid, we are prepared to respond to the needs of students who are going to, and staff and community who are going to be overwhelmed by such a situation. I wanted to mention just physical security on campus. Schools do require a sign-in and a single point of entry for all people who come to the school. I believe there's work being done to harden that and ensure that there's a single point of entry and no spots on campuses where people from the outside can easily enter without going by and checking in at the office. We want to stress see something, say something mentality. Don't assume that someone else has reported it. As I mentioned before, if things are going around on social media and you see something, don't assume that we already know. Please pass that information on. There were some questions that we received when we put out the information for this meeting. There was a Google form with questions submitted online. And so I'd like to get into some of those and ask just the panel here to jump in if you have anything to add. I'll answer them to the best of my ability, but then if you have something to add, please just jump in. So in terms of, and we've hit this quite a little bit, but in terms of community communication with schools and law enforcement, I think we've kind of maybe beat this one, beating a dead horse with this one, but do not spread information on social media and neglect to share with schools and law enforcement. Report it, don't share it, and that's an important message for our students as well. If they see something, if they hear something, if a student makes a comment that's threatening, that's concerning, please share that. We want to know, and we want to investigate.
I just like to add to that real quick. We've seen it, and I think everybody has seen it, where maybe something occurs, and then there's a Facebook post, and that thing has turned from one thing, the actual thing that happened, into a completely different thing by the time everybody has posted on social media about it. So everything gets skewed. And I'm not pointing the fingers at anybody. It's not just students. It's friends, family, adults, parents. We have Facebook and we have social media and we see them too. And it's like, well, we know what really happened, and look at what this turned out. The initial post was this, and by the end of it, it's changed 15 different times and turned into 15 different things. So just please be mindful that you're reading a social media post, and what you're reading may not be the accurate facts of what occurred. If you have questions, please bring them to whatever agency, whether it's the school, whether it's law enforcement. If you're curious, don't just automatically feed into that as what was stated on social media is fact. So we're happy to answer questions where we can related to those types of incidents, but it just turns into a cycle of a mess, basically, that we're on the back end trying to clean up and clarify the message that's been put out there because of the inaccuracies or what it was turned into based on what the initial statement was.
We had a question about what we would do, how to respond if there was a death threat, if a student made a death threat. And we talked a little bit earlier about the threat assessment. So it's going to depend on a lot of factors. The seriousness of the threat. Are we talking about a 17-year-old? Are we talking about a kindergartner? So it's going to depend on that, the seriousness of it, Then from there, the school will do the threat assessment, and then if there is any cause for real concern there, then we would refer to law enforcement. And then, as was noted, there's a process then that starts there, and it can involve, determining whether the student has access to firearms, and so I
Yeah,
wanted to
and
mention that.
with some reports, deputies and law enforcement officers, they have discretion on taking reports or if they're just mitigating situations. Any threat that comes in involving the school requires a case number to be pulled, requires a report to be written, requires a supervisor to review it to ensure that it was investigated thoroughly, that we documented it, that we made the decision to report it through these California Central Intelligence Center. It requires our deputies to pull a case number and actually do something.
I would just add to that it's got to be a verifiable threat too, like that somebody actually said that, somebody actually heard somebody say that, or somebody personally posted it. The rumor mill, just like the whole social media chain that goes down, that turns into, that's the same thing with the rumor mill, whether it's on social media or whether it's people talking. Somebody says somebody said something, but if we can't confirm that this person ever said that, or somebody ever even heard them say that, it's not necessarily going to trigger a whole bunch of actions to follow it. We've got to be able to validate and verify that at least there's, in all likelihood, that this threat did occur.
Yeah, and then the other thing we have to take into account too is the age of the students involved, the mental capacities, like I already mentioned, some of the intoxicants, a whole series of things that we have to consider when going through the investigations.
Thank you. There was a question about how does the school handle behavior incidents? And that's a very broad question, so I'm going to give a bit of a general answer. So it depends on the incident and the context of the incident, of course. Generally, depending on the severity of a behavioral incident, students can receive a range of consequences. And those can be from simple warnings for low-level behaviors, counseling, to detentions, loss of privileges, suspension, expulsion, and notification of law enforcement with possible citation. So it really runs the gamut, depending on what the behavioral incident is, what the impact of the behavioral incident was, if this is a repeated offense. The California Education Code allows for suspension and expulsion for a number of specific infractions related to the possession of weapons, violence, threats of violence, possession of drugs, alcohol and tobacco products, theft, property damage, obscene acts, bullying, sexual assault, and amongst others. If you're interested in reading the whole section of Education Code, it's Education Code 48900. So all you would have to do is Google California Ed Code 48900, and that'll bring up the whole Ed Code about suspendable offenses. That is not to say that every offense requires suspension or expulsion. Actually, there is a section of offenses that do require suspension and expulsion, and then there are those that the school can determine. So there are ones that do require it, such as if a student brings a gun to school, right? That's a automatic expulsion. And so there's a list of those that you can refer to. But the response is always going to depend on a variety of factors. I would encourage anyone who's interested in the specific kind of discipline matrix or process at their school or district to contact the administration there for more specifics. It could be in the handbook. This is our Calaveras County Office of Ed handbook for the programs we run. A lot of schools and districts have those, so it could be in there, but if not, I just would encourage you to speak with the school. We have a question on responding to families and communication in an emergency. And so I think we covered that a little bit. I would stress, in addition, listen to the full communication from the school. I know that I'm a skimmer. You know, I get an email and I skim it, and sometimes you can miss some important information. In these scenarios, before acting, you're really going to want to read everything and make sure you're not missing any important instructions concerning the response to an emergency situation. And information is going to be unique to each particular situation.
And sometimes we do a great job and we get the information out fast, and sometimes it's delayed, and we recognize that and we can do better with it. So we know that, you know, it's not like we're sitting up here and saying that everything's perfect all the time. We can always learn from each one. And that's what the importance is of our work groups with all the school administrators at all the sites. You know, then when there's a changeover in leadership, and then we get back with them and we discuss the joint information process and how quickly, because we know that's a high priority for the parents in our community. So we know it's something that we continue to need to work on.
There was a question on drugs on campus, how to improve the drugs being on campus, or not improve drugs being on campus, but you know what I'm saying, how to reduce the presence of drugs on campus. So the County Office of Education does run a tobacco use prevention education program funded by the state, and so there are activities that happen throughout the county trying to target our youngest students so that they never start using drugs, alcohol, tobacco. It's called tobacco use prevention education, but we really roll all of the harmful substances into that education. So that's one thing that we do is prevention, trying to get those kids at a young age to understand that these substances are harmful to them in their immediate future and in the long term. A lot of schools, especially middle schools and high schools, are putting in vape detectors in the bathrooms to discourage students from vaping on campus. There's been some success with those. School personnel are able to search students for drugs, alcohol, tobacco, when we have a reasonable suspicion that the student might have them. So it's a lower bar than law enforcement. So that does give us the opportunity, if information is brought to us about students possessing drugs or alcohol or tobacco products on campus, for us to be able to intervene and assign consequences there for students, including cessation programs as well. Because I can say we've had students in the recent past who are truly addicted, especially to the vaping, the amount of nicotine that students have no idea how much they're getting in those vapes. And so some students really need help, not just punishment.
Yeah, in the juvenile division of our probation department, yes, we do need to hold all criminals accountable, including some of our juvenile lawbreakers. But the juvenile division of the probation department also has a good part in the diversion program and a huge education component. And they're trying to get more into the schools to start covering more life skills training, different avenues that adolescents can deal with their issues other than turning to substances.
We do contact law enforcement. Schools contact law enforcement if students have illicit drugs, and they can be cited for possession of those. Now, I did want to ask the panel kind of well, I guess I can answer this too, but from the education perspective, but what are we seeing in terms of drugs in the county among young people?
Honestly, here, we've got Bret Hart and we've got Mark Twain Elementary primarily here in Angels Camp, and our biggest problem is the vaping. We haven't seen much illicit drugs in the schools. It's primarily the vapes. I think SRO Kirkman has recovered, I don't know, 50 to 100 vape pens over the last 2 years from kids at Bret Hart that have been taken at some or found on campus. But honestly, I will say I'm never going to say drugs aren't a problem, but we haven't seen like a large uptick in use or even marijuana use at our schools here locally, and I'm assuming it's the same probably throughout the county for the most part.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'd have to pull the statistics to show as well. But even the issues with marijuana possession on the campuses aren't as bad as they used to be. And even a couple years ago, we were starting to see an increase of juveniles misusing the prescription drugs was becoming more of an issue than the hard illicit drugs. So we've been really, really trying to push the message about one pill can kill, because there's so many counterfeit narcotics out there that may look like a Xanax, but really it's fentanyl. And so we've been really pushing that message, and I think it is getting through to the kids, and the amount of overdoses that they've seen in people in the community and celebrities that has been, televised, and the more access they have to social media, the more they're able to see and get exposure to the world and seeing that. So I think all those things have come into play. So I agree with Chief that majority of it's more of vaping or marijuana.
In terms of the presence of fentanyl, though, our schools have partnered with Calaveras Public Health and have held a number of Narcan trainings, and so that's the opioid antagonist that can save a life if somebody is overdosing on an opioid. And the actual medication is available, I believe, at every campus as well. So there are trained personnel that can give that medication to somebody who is overdosing, and we thought that was important, not only for students, but just because we are community centers also, and so you never know when somebody in the community who may be at an event may overdose if they're using those drugs.
And all of our law enforcement officers carry Narcan on their persons in our county.
We had a question asking about the prevention now of knives and guns on campus. So it's really a similar answer to the drugs on campus. It's paying attention, really. It's any information that we get from students, and so again, to parents, if you see something or hear something, report it, because that information is crucial. Somebody knows, right? So if a student brings a weapon on campus, typically they've told somebody, and we need that information. And again, we can search them if we have a reasonable suspicion. But if we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah, and much like Jared talked about earlier about the hardening of the school campuses, it does take a high degree of funding to be able to do that. But then there, just like I said, there's some parents that want to see us on campus, and there's some parents that don't think law enforcement. The same thing. There are some parents that really want to keep open campus. They love the rural community. They don't want the inconvenience of having to be funneled only going through the office to be able to come on campus. People even coming to football games, and complaining about not being able to park on this side of campus to get to the field. If we do harden up to try and weed out more of the weapons, drugs, things like that, we do have to take into account the unique nature of our community and what we do want to see, and do we want high fences all the way around campus? All those things come into play. It's not a yes or no end-all discussion. It's so polarized opinions on it, but that's part of what we're always discussing, and alternatives as far as locking the doors on campus, more security cameras, things like that. Those are always part of our discussions that we have with the school sites. So we got to at least find some sort of happy medium. We can't just ignore the problem.
And that was our last question, as a matter of fact. So to close, we just want to encourage ongoing community engagement with your schools and with your protective agencies, especially if you have school or school district-specific questions that weren't answered tonight. Please do follow up. We want you to have those questions answered. We have a lot of different schools and 4 different districts, and so we're gonna ask you to do that independent of this gathering tonight.
Yeah, and our school resource officers are present tonight, so if you did have any specific questions that weren't addressed beforehand, they are here, they can answer questions, they're more than happy to do so. They're in the back of the room.
We want to thank you all for being here tonight. A QR code's going to go up, and there's sheets on the way out if you want to grab them to provide us feedback, and it'll also provide you the contact information for your school districts if you have specific questions. I wish our crowd was bigger. It's an important issue, but I really thank you all for taking the time. Spread the word. This will be posted on the Bret Harte YouTube channel within a day or so, so it can be shared there. Thank you all.
Thank you.